Global and cultural barriers with technology. We have what you need right here on the Leadership Voice. Welcome to the Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today's show focuses on global and cultural barriers in technology. Joining us today is Beth Wheat, Vice President of Global Transformation at Experian. Beth has been working at Experian for over 10 years, the last 3 of which she has done so remotely. Please welcome great friend, great leader, Beth Wheat.
Hi, Jay. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really enjoying talking with you about working globally and technology's role in that, something that's very near and dear to my heart. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Beth. And a lot of people are discovering just through the introduction of you that you've been doing what they have just started doing. You've been doing it for 10 years. And so you have great perspective to share with everyone. Beth, maybe we could go ahead and jump right in. Could you talk a little bit about your role at Experian and how technology has played such an important part?
Absolutely. So, of course, Experian is a technology company. We're probably best known for credit reporting, but we also do a lot of work in data and analytics and increasingly whole solutions for our clients. So it's been a part of Experian's DNA since its inception. So it's just absolutely essential. But working globally, I think even more so, because we can use the collaboration tools that are available to us, and especially platforms like Zoom that now have, even lay people that don't know anything about technology know how to use Zoom to connect with people and friends. It's really all kind of coming into its own.
And so, in your role specifically, working from home for 10 years in this way, what have been some of the best practices that you've discovered or uncovered during your time at Experian in the global transformation role? Share with us some best practices for working in a high technology environment like this.
Definitely. Well, the first thing is, working from home is so different because, and what I've heard as a result of the pandemic is a lot of people talk about distractions at home, whereas, when you're in the office, you don't necessarily have those. But I actually don't think that's true. I think there are more distractions in the office than we know. And that you can have a really nice blend of life and work by working from home, but you definitely have to be disciplined and stay focused. But that works whether you're working from home or in the office. So the best practice really that I have every day is to look at the top 3 things that I need to accomplish for that day. Try not to be overly distracted by emails that can sort of tug you in different directions. And I think what's really essential and has been in all of the years that I've worked from home is to maintain a network. You have to make an extra effort to stay connected to people and to what's going on, get a read on what's important, and be assertive and proactive about maintaining awareness, because otherwise you can get into a bubble.
You mentioned discipline, and also you talked a little bit about that work-life balance. Could you talk about how folks who are working from home and now they've got family around and things, how do you keep the discipline? How do you maintain that balance? How do you maintain that professionalism? How do you do that at the executive level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's different. To me, it is a little bit different pre and post pandemic. Mostly because with everybody working from home, and I think this is a good thing, there's a lot more empathy for people who can't necessarily close their office door and say, these are my 8 hours of working and you have to leave me alone. Now, I've been able to do that because most of the time that I've been working from home, my children have been grown. But I have a separate office. The space is set up to help me be focused on business. It's also inspirational. And I think that that's important too. And I even do have pictures of my family, even though they might be right outside the door, to keep me motivated in my workspace. So I think that that's definitely part of it. And for me, discipline is freedom. So sometimes discipline has a negative connotation, like it's something punitive. But when you think about it, if you really are disciplined with your time and you carve out time to get your first priorities taken care of, that gives you freedom to determine what you do with the rest of your time. So that is probably one of the predominant themes for me in having worked from home for many, many years. And now during the pandemic, it's actually lightened up a little bit because just yesterday, one of my managers has a young son, and his wife usually takes care of him while he's on calls, and she had to leave. And so at the top of the call, he apologized and said, "I apologize if my son comes in." And I said, "That's just absolutely fine. In fact, it's charming to see people's kids and dogs and all of that, and it's not too disruptive." But the irony was that his son didn't come in, but my son came in unexpectedly to bring me a cup of coffee. And so, but it's very human. And, it was just another great connecting moment for all of us. So I like that element of it.
Well, that's great, and I love the anecdote that you shared. And it sounds like, as you've described it, a couple of the keys are staying disciplined and setting strong priorities, and then staying true to those priorities as a way of making sure that you're making the moving the dial or moving the needle on a daily
Yes,
basis.
absolutely.
And that's great. So how has the pandemic and this necessity for folks to be working remotely, to be working from home, how has that changed the demands and practices of work?
Well, I think we're still learning a lot about the entire scope of that. In the early days for Experian, well, for us, it was pretty easy because as a global company, we were all, I shouldn't say it was easy because it wasn't easy at all. And I'm taking away from a pretty enormous effort to get the whole company working from home in just a couple of weeks, which we did. However, that being said, people were already accustomed to working a lot on conference calls, working globally, managing different time zones. I think the real difference was all of a sudden you might have two spouses or multiple people working from home. And then you had schools closing. So you had just the demand on your home internet bandwidth with everybody trying to log into their various systems was something that people didn't think about. The other thing is when you don't have the opportunity to be on campus together and you don't have those water cooler encounters that we talk about, and you still have that need, as I said before, to maintain an awareness of what's going on, the tendency is to schedule time to talk to people. So we have found that people are booked with meetings much more solidly than they were in the past. And then that makes it difficult sometimes to, every meeting, if it's a good meeting, creates some kind of an action. And so if you don't have time to look after those actions, that can become stressful. So we're now we're past that honeymoon phase where everybody was really excited. Now we're dealing with the reality of maintaining that discipline and focus under this new framework, this new way of working. And I think that's part of it. Morale has been good because people are grateful for being able to work and for having a company that's looking after their well-being and wanting to keep them safe. And at the same time, we're going into winter for half the world. And so we're looking at that and the holiday season looking very differently. So we're seeing now, that more of a bleak reality is hitting, and that's the next challenge for us.
Wow. Thank you so much, Beth. Beth, could you tell us, if you were talking to somebody who is just taking over a global role in today's environment, what advice would you give somebody if they were stepping into a global leadership executive type of role?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, first of all, congratulations, because you have just entered into a world that is incredibly richly rewarding. It's wonderful to have colleagues and friends all around the world, especially during this pandemic, understanding that we're, as a human family, what we're all going through, and reminding ourselves of all the things that we have in common is so rich. And then the cultural differences add richness as well. So my first piece of advice would be enjoy it and learn as much as you can. I think it is really important to understand cultural differences. And I think it's very important to do a lot of introspection about your own potential biases. There's a lot of talk in the space today relative to diversity and inclusion that we have to be aware of our biases. And I'm a firm believer in that, but it is not at all easy to do. Most of us tend to think that we aren't biased, which in and of itself is a bias. So I think you really have to be honest with yourself and be very curious. And I think if you understand that it is the fact that people come from different cultural backgrounds, that they have different learning modalities, different problem-solving abilities, that is the richness that you're trying to mine. And sometimes a leader coming in will be, instead of embracing that, they're intimidated by it because someone from another culture who's not speaking up on a call, or someone who is maybe always deferring to leadership on a call and then taking action differently after the call, these can be frustrating, but you can anticipate all of that, you can manage it. And if you embrace it and say, my role as a leader is to figure out how to bring out the best in all of this rich diversity, that's how you're going to be successful. And it's actually how you will have the most fun.
And so I assume not all global roles are going to be the same, obviously. So like, for example, in your case, Beth, how many different countries do you potentially work with in a given day or a given week?
I don't think in terms of countries because we're organized by region, but I work with people in the UK and I, North America, Central America, South America, and then in Europe, in what we call the EMEA region. So South Africa, we have people in Australia, people in India. So those are kind of the main areas that I work with. Experian has a pretty massive global footprint, but my day-to-day work doesn't necessarily connect me with all of our locations.
But just with that list that you described, you have just described so many incredibly unique cultural clusters.
Yes.
Talk about, if you would, a little bit about the cultural adaptability that you have to display throughout your day and throughout the work in this type of environment.
Well, it's one of those things where, since I have been doing it for so long, and fortunately I had some formal education in the space coming into it, it's ingrained in me now. But I think that the main thing is to be curious about people's cultures, to always respect their cultures, to be very careful about the difference between stereotyping and understanding cultural nuance, because people are still individuals, and you may read up on a culture and get a classic overview of how they respond to hierarchy or whatever it is. And then you'll meet an individual who's very different than that. So always remember that you're talking to an individual or a collection of individuals who don't necessarily fit a generalization. I think that's really important. And then just being mindful. I think one of the things that it's easy to do is not necessarily, if you book a meeting with someone on a holiday, and especially if you're in a leadership role and you have seniority over that person, you didn't realize it was a holiday in their region or country, and you did that, and different people will take that different ways. So you really want to be careful. You want to be aware of what's going on in those regions or countries when you're talking to people.
Oh, that's
Knowing
great.
that there's an active volcano, before you jump on a conference call is a really good thing to do.
It sounds like it's an incredible opportunity to work with people who are in different cultures. You get exposed to different cultures. You get to embrace different cultures. And if you get really good at it, you become incredibly culturally fluid.
I would say that's true. I mean, I think your work is never done. But definitely it gets easier and easier to adapt because you have that familiarity. And the other thing is to keep in mind that generally most people are very curious about other cultures as well. So, and you get to the point where you're comfortable and, you can take a little bit of ribbing about, the American stereotypes and that kind of thing. And it's a great opportunity to bond, but they want to learn about you too. And to the extent that you can show up and be your authentic self and share, that makes them comfortable in that space also.
Oh, that's great. Well, Beth, we do have a couple of questions from our audience. So why don't we go ahead and turn to those, if that's okay? We'll maybe take a couple questions. So our first question comes from Don Reese from The Wooden Floor. Don asks, as you've adapted with change, what have you learned about yourself and organizations that informs your work today and into a post-pandemic future?
That is a great question. I am a person who really enjoys change, and I feel like I have a 3-year expiration date. I really haven't done, even though I've been with Experian 10 years, every 3 years I've moved into a different role. And I'm thrilled to work somewhere where I have that opportunity. I think that we know actually that the pace of change is accelerating. And I think that the pandemic is actually contributing to that. We're not quite sure what post-pandemic world looks like, but we know we need to be prepared for future situations like this. And so that means getting really comfortable with change. And a lot of people are not. So if you're not, and since I'm not that type, I don't really have great advice in that regard, but I think, talk to other people who are more comfortable and understand perhaps, where their comfort level comes from, and talk to like-minded people and talk about how you cope, because I think we're seeing another revolution, probably beyond the scale of the Industrial Revolution and what we call the information age. We're truly working now in a digital realm that's a new frontier.
Yeah, and it sounds like the way you're describing organizations, and I think this is happening globally. I don't think it's just in certain areas, but we're seeing this need to be ready for change, this need to change and be ready for future changes.
Yes, absolutely.
So our next question, it comes from Cynthia in Long Beach. Cynthia asks, how has your cultural competency improved while working virtually with people around the world? We kind of touched on this a little.
Yes, but that's a good question. And the competency, like anything, it improves with practice. So the more you do it, the better it becomes. But just a few tips and techniques that I learned early on is when you're using teleconferencing or even just or video conferencing, making use of the chat functionality is really helpful, especially for people that are speaking if their English is a second language and your calls are happening in English or in any language for that matter. If you have people that are not as fluent with the language, using chat and making it okay for people to say, can you repeat what you said? Or what does that word mean? I try to do that with my team calls, and it's good learning for everybody. That's something that I've learned along the way. What I mentioned before about being careful to not stereotype people and get to know people at an individual level is another tip. And also taking time to make sure that every voice is heard, because there are this isn't really cultural, but there are people who are not comfortable speaking out, especially on larger calls. And if you have to, you call them out, or again, you can use that chat, but make sure that every voice is being heard.
No, that's terrific. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So our third question comes from Jeff in Anaheim. And Jeff asks, what has been your biggest mistake working remotely across cultures? And what have you learned from this mistake?
I think the biggest mistake that I've made, and I probably do still make it, is trying to move too fast. I think you have to think of progress, that progress is sort of a wedged shape. But you have to progress the whole wedge. You can't just get the tip of the wedge over the line. And so you have to spend time engaging all of your stakeholders and making sure everybody's bought into whatever the goal is and that they understand their role in it, and check back to be sure that people feel supported. And that does take extra time when you're crossing boundaries. And you have to, because of time zone differences and things like that, it just requires a lot of personal flexibility.
Oh, that's a good reminder. And so, Beth, we've picked up a lot of themes from today. You've talked a lot about working from home, and also about technology, but we've also touched on the cultural adaptability piece. So I think we've actually left our viewers with a lot of valuable insights. So I want to thank you for being on the show today and joining us here on the Leadership Voice.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm a huge Cal State Fullerton fan. So good luck to everybody that's listening in.
Terrific. And that's all the time we really have for today's show. Please join us each episode of The Leadership Voice as we'll bring you relevant and timely topics to guide your leadership and development. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership at Cal State Fullerton, we'll see you next time right here on The Leadership Voice.